Hey guys, it's your boy Dithy. I am a little drunk right now. It's about 6 in the morning. I'm going to try to keep this brief because I'm also trying to record some shit. This is this is nothing very professional or important. This is just kind of a chill, one-sided conversation. Probably going to be a little bit of dead air in it. I'm drinking a little bit of bourbon right now. I tried recording this last week around the time I had my birthday, but then FL Studio shat itself because I was trying to make it save and recognize a 70-minute file. Essentially, what inspired this is that I know a couple of people who will say things to me like that I just never sleep, or that I just seem kind of superhuman in how much shit I do. I mean, a lot of people who listen to my music probably don't know the full depth of shit I get up to. I'm also a writer. I've written maybe 300 to 350,000 words of prose and green text in the fandom. I've written about 1,000,000 words in general. Last year, I read about 85 books. In general, I'm always trying to do something. I'm going to try to stick to a lot of concrete examples of the things I'm going to be talking about. I have a whole little outline around here. So essentially, if you're wondering what it is that I put inside my coffee, besides bourbon, then this is going to be the talk for you. I think the biggest thing that I could give you right now is that there are two kinds of motivation. And this has to do with how much willpower you have to invest into them. The first one I would just say is willpower-oriented motivation. You have to continuously invest your willpower in order to make something happen. Imagine exercising. You don't want to exercise, then you go and do it. And you don't want to do it the next week, and you go and do it anyway. In each case, you have to perform the same transaction of willpower. The other system is a momentum-oriented system, where you put in a relatively small amount of willpower as an initial investment into some kind of system that makes you want, of your own accord, to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. Now, I would say willpower, it's necessary, and in fact vital. There are going to be points in your life where willpower is going to be what stands between you and you or someone you love dying, or something else equally awful happening. So I don't want to discount it, but I feel like willpower orientation is a bit too strong in the modern self-help market. I would say the mark of a life that's moving in the right direction is that you don't have to do things like quoting Marcus Aurelius to get out of bed in the morning. But for a more relevant and close to home example, for something motivation oriented, when I finished my first Pony album, Hold Your Horses, I accomplished almost everything that I really wanted to do. Like, I had kind of a vague set of goals. Things like, I wanted certain people to notice me, I wanted to have a certain number of fans, I wanted someone to talk about me, I wanted to get on EQD, and I figured all that would happen around my third to fifth album, and it all happened during my first. So I was left without much to work with. Because of that, I just chose a goal at random. I was going to make something ridiculous. Something that was huge and unwieldy. It was going to be 40 tracks long, and it was going to be all based on the number 4, and it would be inspired by one of the worst rated episodes in the show, and I would use all this lore I had about Cutie Pox, and yeah, the 4 humors, let's throw that in there. And it turned into this crazy project that eventually became Patient Zero. Now, I knew from the beginning that the final product wouldn't look anything like what I was picturing when I started out. Plus, things as simple as like the story of the album, I didn't have a clear picture of until the last week or so. And it was fun in its own way, but there were a lot of challenges involved. I mean, I had to figure out how to organize people. It was the first time I was collaborating with anybody. And at some point, certain projects, or sub-projects, if you like, they fell through, and I just had to keep moving on. So, my goal was about 40 tracks. I wound up making 44. My goal at one point was to hit 52. I couldn't do it. That's important. I'm going all over the place. But failure is important. I'm going to keep my finger on Patient Zero so I don't forget this, because the last time I did this, I forgot where I was fucking going. Failure is genuinely important because although you should never feel proud or happy to fail, and you should always want to do better, that's an important part of failure. Failure locates you in the topology of problem space. What I mean when I say that is that if you imagine all the possible things you could be doing, all the things that you could be trying to become really, really good at, as this giant field full of mountains and peaks and valleys, failure lets you know at about what challenge level you're at, about how high above sea level you are. If you fail at everything you're doing, you're too high up, because you're failing at everything that you do, and you should adjust lower. If you succeed at everything you do, although people tend to think that that's a really good thing, you should adjust upwards into some more things that you're more likely to fail at, because that's the only way that you're going to grow. Ideally, a certain percentage, maybe 10% to 20% of your projects should have a reasonable chance of failure, by which I mean they should be genuine challenges to you. Patient Zero. There we go. So at the end of this giant 40-day period, because that's what I decided, Patient Zero would be finished in 40 days from when I started it. For like the last 4 days, I just sat on my couch in my pajamas. I called off work for 4 days in a row. I made no money that week. And I just sat there, writing, and then going into my room and recording for like 6-hour stretches. I was way worse at recording then, and it was all in Audacity too, so there was no way to make it any better. So, for those 4 days, I did not focus on anything except finishing my album. I didn't eat like more than one meal a day. I didn't sleep very much. I didn't take phone calls. I didn't leave my apartment. I just sat there in the dark, writing this shit for what was eventually a free album, and not a terribly great album, even by my own standards. But I'm very proud for having done that. I feel like that is something that not everyone would be willing to do. And knowing that in advance is a big part of what motivated me. Knowing that I would be able to look back on what I did and the willpower that I exerted with a kind of pride. Now contrast that with something I wrote. Writing, in general, is something that is very fun to me after I invest a certain amount of willpower. But because I have to perform a continuous investment, I would usually consider it to be willpower driven. This distinction may break down at certain resolutions, though. I'm trying not to talk like fucking Immanuel Kant. The thing is, almost all of the stuff that I've written, when it comes to word count, not in terms of percentage of stories, the majority of my writing for MLP has been JoJo's Bizarre Adventure crossover fanfiction for the JoJo General on /MLP. And I got into that because it just was really fun. There's a whole lot of shit about JoJo that I could talk about for another fucking hour if I wanted. But in general, writing JoJo is really fun because there's a set of rules for JoJo that are different than for other kinds of stories. So a large part of it involves letting characters do their own thing and kind of surprise you as the writer. It's really, really fun to me to write JoJo-style fiction because it lets my characters talk back to me and make their own decisions and kind of do things I wasn't expecting. And when I started out, I would say... Well, maybe I should explain this. For writers, usually we think of the length of a work in terms of its word count, the same way as you might for a college essay, instead of by its page count. I think the switch to fan fiction, the emphasis that we put on fan fiction, has probably changed the way people think about this. But suffice to say that I always measured what I could do in terms of my word count, how many words I could write in one sitting, however long the sitting was. When I was in high school, about the most I could do, and this was a struggle, was about 2,000 words. I could scarcely write a story that was 2,000 words long. It just seemed so Herculean. It was so big and unwieldy. I could write an essay that was 12,000 words long if I wanted, but in essays you can meander and come back to points, and you can go back and elaborate on something forever. And in a story, you have to follow a sequence of events, and once something's over, you can't go back, or else you're kind of a bad writer and you're wasting the reader's time. So when I started writing JoJo, I could pull off maybe 3,000 words. Usually that was in multiple sittings, too. And over time, I became a little better and a little better. I stopped posting parts of chapters and posted full chapters, and from there my chapters grew from being 3,000 words to 4,000, 5,000. I had a couple that were 10,000, 11,000. Usually those were very jam-packed. And then there came this one. It was the third chapter, technically the third act is what I called it, of Marble Pie's Bizarre Adventure. It was green text. It was beautiful. It looks awful in prose, though. I hate that I had to put it on fanfiction as prose, because it ruins the tempo of reading it one line at a time. Marble Pie's Bizarre Adventure, Act 3, to save you a long explanation of shit that I've written. It's about this long series of gambling games, essentially. Every one of my chapters, I tried to include one fight, the same way that an episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure would. And in this one, I had like 6 or 7 fights. And all of them stacked up together to form this one coherent narrative with all the same chills and spills as a regular episode of JoJo. And the fact that they were all gambling games, that people with supernatural powers are all cheating at, let me go out and buy a pack of playing cards. These awful-looking little MLP playing cards. And I threw them down on my carpet, and I started shuffling them, and I dealt out hands, and I wouldn't look at some of the hands based on whose perspective I was in. And I just sat there writing this on my floor while I played, poker with myself, basically. And by the end of the night, that morning, I'd written 20,000 words. That is probably my proudest accomplishment as a writer. And it was so much fucking fun, man. Now, not everything could be that fun, but I feel like that's the right direction to go in. You should move in directions that make you stronger and happier, not just ones that achieve shorter midterm goals. That's something I have issues with. But now that I'm kind of done with the fucking autobiography of all this, I'm just imagining someone in a fucking comment section. I'm gonna fall asleep. I'm imagining someone in a comment section looking at this and writing out one of those little time code guides. Oh, man. I'm not editing this. Fuck. So, in terms of practical advice, the first thing you need to do before you can achieve your goals is to pick your goals. And this is important because you can make a lot of really stupid mistakes in picking your goals. First off, think of your work, whatever work you want to do, in terms of streams. That is, don't imagine a point in the future where you're going to be finished, because you're not. You'll be finished with a given project, but the finishing of that project will open up more opportunities for you. You're never going to hit the end, especially if it's something that you can just keep getting better at forever. So, you should decide about how much of what streams you want to take on. Like for writing, I could say that I want to be a good writer, and I have when I was much younger. But that's not a concrete goal. That's not a goal that I should pick. It might be a dream to strive for, but you should take a part of that and move toward that part. Something like, I want to write 1,000,000 words. That's something that you can measure. It's something you can take care of. I'll get back to that in a second. Another thing is that you should not be nobler than you are. Or don't pretend to be nobler than you are. That is, don't exercise for the sake of running a 500-kilometer super marathon, whatever, if you're really just trying to get fit so you can get laid. Don't try to become the best in your field for deep love of the game or whatever, if what you really want to do is to make someone else look stupid. This isn't because one of those goals is any worse than the other, objectively speaking. It's because there's a faster way to get to the other goal. If you want to get laid, and that's why you're working out, there are probably ways that you can work out that will make you look better instead of prioritizing just muscle strength and stamina and shit like that. Or there's just other ways to get laid. Another thing is that you want your effort to be sustainable. Like, you don't want to burn out, is what I'm saying. And this is a real problem with any kind of attempt to become productive in your life. Productivity systems, in general, tend to fizzle out after a couple weeks. There's sort of a honeymoon period where people get really, really in love with them, and then they just fall out of favor. This is good in the sense that it lets you iterate very quickly. You can experiment with a whole bunch of them, and whichever ones don't fall off, you can stick with. But it's also annoying, and for people who don't expect that, it can be really, really disheartening. On the same note as not being nobler than you actually are, Don't do things because you should do them. This is very important. It's one of the notes that made me want to do this in the first place. When you pick your goals, figure out what goals you're picking just because you feel like you should pick them. Because should is a really poisonous concept. Should. In reality, there is no such thing as a thing you should do. There are things that you have to do and things that you want to do. There is no thing that you should do. In fact, even things that you have to do are ultimately reducible into things that you want to do. For instance, I want to continue living, so I have to breathe and eat and sleep. I want to make this, so I have to sit here in the heat with some bourbon and talk into this microphone while staring at my computer. For whatever want you have, there's a set of have-tos that will get you to your goal. When you say that you should do something, in essence, you're creating a sense of obligation, a sense of guilt that gets in the way of this fact. Often, should has to do with things that you feel like you would want to if you were a better person, but you don't want to. Now, in that case, as I said slightly earlier, out of order with my notes, I should add, it may be true that if you were more the person that you wanted to be, you wouldn't have difficulty wanting to do a certain thing. But you shouldn't want to progress in a way that makes you feel self-loathing. Unless you feel that you are so desperately far down that you must climb up as fast as possible. And there are cases where you may want to do that. Ultimately, you'll be happier off if you take steps to become the person that you most want to be, that make you enjoy becoming that person. Otherwise, when you get there, you may feel a sort of regret for the path that you've chosen. Now, a couple quick examples of dissolving should into want to and have to, and ignoring it entirely. My most recent release is the Princess Aurora EP. Part of that was that I really wanted to learn how to produce. I wanted to make all my own tracks, and I wanted to make really weird tracks, because the original conception was based almost entirely off of the producer Prefuse73, who was a very early glitch hop producer, back before glitch hop was a kind of dance music. So I wanted to make a whole bunch of old school glitch hop, and there was nothing at all that I could learn about it. I could listen to a couple albums. There were only a handful of albums from the early period that I actually wanted to emulate. And there were no tutorials or guides. Even looking for glitch hop tutorials was just a dead end, because I would run into these tutorials on how to make the modern dance music kind of glitch hop. So eventually, I just realized that I felt like I should be a good producer. I mean, I'm a rapper. I like the idea of being a producer, of making my own beats that are really weird and cool. I like the beats that I've made so far. I actually made one earlier tonight. But I didn't feel that strongly about making essentially a resurrection for an entire old genre of music that's currently dormant. I didn't feel like that was really at my challenge level. So ultimately, I decided that I would change the parameters of what I was doing. Instead of trying to make this entire album on my own, I would get some help from other people. On top of that, since I really just wanted to rap on things from Prefuse 73, I decided that the album would just be free, and I took some beats from him. In the end, it got out in like a week, where before it had taken months and months of staring at my screen and putting it off and wondering, oh man, when am I going to work on it? When am I going to suddenly become good at producing? Oh, what books can I read that'll make me better at it? It just dissolved the problem into very simple, easy to do parts that ultimately led to a pretty good conclusion. Another great example is this video. I had a very complex idea where I was going to sit down and explain everything I knew about pony rap music. Now, if you're already this far into this video, you can see why that would be really insufferable to listen to. But I was going to do all of that, teach everything that I know about how to rap, which admittedly might not be that much, but believe me, I can stretch it out. And then I would use all that, step by step, to make an EP, and it would be called the Proof of Concept EP. Now, I may still do that, but I realized a large part of what I wanted to do was just sit down and do like an hour-long podcast where I try to teach people things they didn't already know. Something kind of relaxed, where there wasn't really an interest in doing it right. And I realized that I could just do that instead of bothering with making all these plans for yet another project and, writing down a lesson plan for all of the, 50 different videos I would make and collecting all the different sound files for... Oh, shit. I want to take a shot. Like going through my personal theorized history of when and where yelling at cats made different kinds of progress. That would be fun, but it's not fun relative to the amount of time and energy I would have to put into it. So, I lowered the amount of time and energy that I would have to put into it. I turned it into something that was kind of fun to do, something that I could justify doing, and then I came here and started doing it. Now next, once you have goals, it's important to concretize them, to make them measurable. Now first off, you should write your goals down. A goal that you don't write down is as bad as a goal that doesn't exist. But you should also make them measurable. You should make them understandable, first of all, and you should make some way of measuring them. Like I said before, if you can't measure the full goal, it's usually more of a dream or a hope or a wish. Like, I want to be a good writer. Often it's something in a domain that you don't have much experience in yet. So you don't know what it would mean to be a good writer. You figure that once you hit a certain point, you'll just know. But in that case, you can set a goal, an interim goal, for something that you can measure. Like, I want to do this much per day. I want to hit this much by the end of the year. Stuff like that. Now, what makes a lot of people, I think, resistant to the idea of making measurable goals is that often putting numbers on your goals, like realizing exactly how much you're trying to expect out of yourself, makes the problem seem insurmountable, because you realize that you're expecting yourself to write 10,000 words a day or something like that. And you know that you're never going to do that. Or at least you feel that way. So you get kind of depressed and you instinctively move away from trying to put down these numbers because they might try to take your dreams away again. To this, I have to say, I have to badly misquote the Litany of Gwendolen. Your goals are either attainable or they're not in their current forms. That is, what's real is real, even if you don't accept it. there's nothing else to be lived. And whatever it is, however bad it is, you can live with it because you're already living with it. So, when you make a goal measurable and it just doesn't seem like it's going to work, that is a golden opportunity to reduce it, to solve it, to make it into something that you can achieve, or to turn it into a step toward a final goal that you can achieve eventually. Another good idea, after you've dissolved should and tried to, well, just notice where you say should to yourself. The first time I tried doing this, I kept catching myself saying should, and I'm probably going to say it a bunch of times now, but I just don't have the mental energy and concentration to catch it. But after this, dissolve try from your vocabulary. Now, maybe not to other people. When you say try to another person, I'm going to try, what you're really saying is that you're going to do it, but it might not work. And this is kind of a social token. It is a preemptive excuse. If you said it afterwards, it would be a real excuse. But because it has to do with an event that hasn't happened yet, we don't treat it as an excuse. Now, for people who are very willpower-oriented, the kind of people who want you to work out and lift weights, 5 times a week, and take cold showers, and, do push-ups on the hood of your car every time you're in a traffic jam or whatever, they'll tell you not to use the word try in some cases, because it's just kind of weak, and you can trick yourself into feeling like you've tried when you haven't, or when you haven't done nearly enough. Now, that's certainly true. I mean, a weak effort is usually enough to convince you that you've tried. Often when you don't have a clear idea of what it means that you're going to do. So, when I say that you should dissolve try, what I mean is that you should take whatever you're about to say when you say try and turn it into a set of steps. I'm going to try to do this. Well, no, I'm going to do this, and then after that, I'm going to do this, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to do this, and if none of these things work, I'm going to sit down and brainstorm 5 new ideas for 15 minutes or whatever. You can become as detailed with this as you like, but it helps, especially when you're talking to yourself, to not put off your own decisions to your future self. That's what you do when you say that you're going to try to do something. And then when that time comes, you stare at the wall and you make the thinking man pose and you try very hard, but you don't take any concrete steps that might lead to a solution because you're not thinking in concrete steps. You're thinking in terms of expending willpower and energy towards a goal. So if you frown really hard and you scrunch your eyebrows, that is expending as much willpower as, looking up a solution. Also, different goals have very different methods for getting to them. For example, if you wanted to learn a new skill, if I wanted to learn jiu-jitsu, I have no idea how to learn jiu-jitsu. But I can guess, first off, that there are a certain number of things that people who are really good at jiu-jitsu can do. And then I can kind of bring those down into a series of steps that I could emulate. The sort of wax on, wax off technique. And then from there, I could set out 2 hours for the next 10 days where I would practice certain of these things over that time period. Now this is the method in the book, The First 20 Hours. Of course, there's more specific stuff about how to pick exactly what you should learn, but in general, this is a pretty good way to become competent at any given skill. And yet, when you go with something like writing a novel, if you're not me, if you want to write a novel, well, first off, you can't just start by saying, my first step is to write the first chapter. when you break these things down into steps, you have to start with things, however simple they are, things that might even feel childish at first, things that feel effortless to do. So, writing a novel, when you sit down to write the first chapter, if you have no information on what your story is about, you're going to write a really shitty first chapter, if you even manage to do it at all. What you should do is start out by writing a list of 10 to 20 things that you would like to write a book about. Now that is a pretty simple first step. You can make it even simpler. Get a piece of paper can be a first step. Sit down in your chair can be a first step. Once you've taken the first step, there's a greater momentum towards doing the other steps. But it has to be a step that you can do, and that you are willing to do, that you feel good about doing. If you just feel like you should be able to do it, anyone should be able to do something that simple, but you don't feel good about doing it, you're not going to do it. And yet, even that is very different from a goal like not smoking. Now, if I wanted to quit my massive chain smoking habit, my vape pen addiction, I might try to make myself accountable to other people, or find other people who are pursuing the same goal and make myself accountable to them. I might try to compete with people for it, to see how long I can go without a cigarette. I would try to find communities of people, normally driven more by willpower-oriented people, and integrate myself into them. And then whenever I have some kind of issue, I would just immerse myself in that community and let them kind of build my willpower back up. Another thing I want to tell you about are to-do lists. These are things that work very well for me. There are other techniques and systems and things. For instance, if you want, one very comprehensive system is to just take everything in your life, every concern you have, everything that's in your room that's not where you want it to be forever, every problem that you're going to face in the next 6 months, everything that could be better in your life, every project that you want to work on but haven't gotten around to yet. Just make a big fat list of everything. And then, for everything that takes less than 5 minutes to take care of it. And then for everything that remains, decide whether you're really going to work on it or not. And then for all of those things, maybe make a list, and then once a week look at the list and determine what the very next thing you can do for each one of those things is. That's the beginnings of the getting things done method by David Allen. Now, if you want to go hardcore getting things done, like if you are a really fucking Twilight Sparkle kind of person, you can actually continue down this method to infinity. Like, David Allen has a whole section of his book which will explain how to fit everything relevant about your life into a single filing cabinet. But for the rest of us, like I said before, productivity systems have a honeymoon period and then they go stale. So it's okay to move between them. This includes to-do lists. I've made a whole bunch of different types of to-do lists. Even right now, I'm using a whole bunch of different types. Right now, I have a loose spreadsheet that I made using the Getting Things Done method, and that contains most of my goals. I have a workflowy page, which I'm reading this off of, that I typically use to hold a handful of very important long-term goals, and then a set of steps for how I might go about achieving them. And tonight, in particular, I had a whole bunch of shit I wanted to get done, so I wrote it all down in a page from a composition notebook in clusters based on what project I wanted to get done. This is the culmination of a project of about 7 steps. So, I'm not saying that you should do this. I want to make that clear. This can be a very easy recipe for chaos and misery. But in my case, it helps to jump between a whole bunch of different systems and go to each one when I need it. So I use different ones for different things. For someone who's just starting out, it usually helps to just have a to-do list. You should know what it is that you're going to do in a given day, or that you want to get done. You should have an understanding of how much of your to-do list you should expect to get done, because it probably won't be all of it. There's different philosophies when it comes to making a to-do list. Some people want to make it as small as possible. Like, you shouldn't have more than 2 or 3 items on a to-do list if they're really super effective. But personally, I just feel really good when I get a lot of things done across a lot of different domains. So I try to put as much shit on my to-do list as possible, and then do it as fast as possible. I'm sure we'll return to that toward the end. But whichever area you choose to go in, writing down what you want to get done, even in general terms, in steps that you can check off one by one, can give you a sense of accomplishment, and also to let you know how fast you're achieving your goals. You can review to-do lists and see what things you just don't do, what things you tend to consistently avoid over a period of a couple weeks. Now, in the same way, you can aid your data collection by... Well, there's extra shit you can add onto a to-do list, naturally. One idea is that you can prioritize. You can write down all the things you want to do, and then you can write down a letter, A, B, or C, next to each of them. A's are things that you have to do. There's no getting around it. B's are things that you probably want to do, or that it would be a good idea to do. And C's are things that you don't want to do and don't have to do, or things that just aren't important. This is Alan LeCain's model. This works really well if you're just doing shit for work, and you don't put things like, watching the latest episode of MLP onto your to-do list. Because those things usually wind up being C's, and then you prioritize C's over A's, which defeats the point. When you do this, you just eliminate as many C's as possible. You shove them off on other people, or you just choose not to do them. And then you do all the A's, and then you do as many of the B's as you can, or as many as you want to, until you're done. Then you go home and you chill out. You can invent other models pretty easily. I invented a kind of to-do list based on the Dazzlings. I just split it into 3 different colors, because I had a whole bunch of colored pens. Blue is fun, so anything that I wanted to do for its own sake, I would make blue. Purple is stuff that I had to do for the sake of continuing to live. So paying my bills and, negotiating my water heater repairs or whatever. Anything like that. Anything that you don't really want to do but have to do. Like cooking, cleaning, going to the grocery store. All that was purple. And anything that I wanted to do, but for the sake of advancing a goal, anything that I did for the sake of ambition, would be orange. Now, doing those 3 in tandem, I could fit just about anything I wanted onto my to-do list. But also importantly, I could see whether or not I was balanced between these 3 things. So I could notice when I was just ignoring large parts of my life and the maintenance thereof, or when I was just choosing to work on things instead of having fun. These are things that you might not notice if you're just writing a to-do list each day. You can do this with just about anything, I should add. You can do this with the Elements of Harmony, with the Magic the Gathering color wheel. You can do it with different races from Warhammer 40k. Whatever fits for you, whatever feels fun. Now, a lot of this stuff that I've just been talking about, it does focus a lot on momentum, and it discounts a lot of the effects of willpower. In reality, there's a lot of stuff that you have to do that you don't want to. You don't just get to pick your own goals. You have shit you have to do for work. You have teachers, probably. A lot of people who listen to this are probably in high school or college. And in that case, your real problem isn't deciding what you want to do, or figuring out how to write it out, or any of this other flowery bullshit. It's just having the willpower to do it. How to stop procrastinating, because you keep wanting to, but you just, you can't. You better go soak yourself in ice water and tear out your kidneys and eat them. And with these kinds of necessary projects, I'm not going to lie to you, getting them done earlier is better, even though you probably won't be able to bring yourself to do that, at least unless you hit a larger amount of willpower than you have now. You can grow willpower. That's by doing things that you don't want to do, or by going further than you did before, or further than other people do. A lot of willpower is just innate in you, and you have more than you think. It's just the understanding that willpower is something that can run out makes you feel like it runs out faster. If you tell yourself that your willpower doesn't deplete, you tend to have more of it. But when you have this big project 6 months from now that has to happen, there are a couple things you can do. The first thing you can do is what's called eating the frog. You can just take care of it. You can set, say, an artificial deadline of a week or a day, and you can do it as fast as possible. This will be much shittier than if you did it over the longer time span. But let's be fucking honest, you weren't going to do it over the long time span anyway, so it was going to be shitty, but just for 3 days, 6 months in the future anyway. So getting it done in 3 days now saves you a whole lot of headache. The other way, and I think for people who feel nervous about trying to eat the frog, this one's probably going to be more useful, is what's called structured procrastination, where you take that one thing that's going to happen in 6 months, and you agree that you will work on it eventually, but there's all these other things that you want to get done, right? There's all these other goals you're working towards, other projects. You want to write that book, you want to do all these other things. And based on how huge and malevolent and scary your huge project in the future is, you can basically cram as much shit as you want in between yourself and that project in order to not think about it. Now, for example, I took a first aid class in college, and I finished this one assignment to do every problem in the book. We had a basic textbook. You had to turn in every problem and their answers at the end of the semester. So on maybe the second or third week, I just went into the library and I sat down for 4 hours and I did it. It wasn't difficult, especially not when I'd started. It wasn't exactly, fun. But it was good to know that I'd gotten it done. In a more serious fashion, during my last semester, which was incredibly hectic, I put off finishing a final project in order to read The Chase by Kudzu Haiku. I can't even say the longest pony fan fiction anymore, because Diaries of a Madman got longer, but certainly one of the best epics ever written. This was a book that I'd basically given up on before. I got about 70,000 words into it, which is about the length of a book, and it's 2.3 million words long. So I just didn't feel like I could read it. But when I was doing it to relax and to ignore a whole list of other shit I was trying to get done, like trying to take care of my first apartment, and doing the cooking for me and my roommate, and taking extra classes so I could graduate early, and all kinds of extra stupid shit like that, suddenly it became a whole lot easier, because it was something that I could put in between myself and the stuff that I didn't want to think about. Here's a list of general one-off tricks. Not all of these are going to work for you, but one or two probably will, statistically. Human brains are very similar, so when it comes to productivity techniques, the whole range of them, it would be very weird if there was a person that none of these techniques worked for. Pretty easy one, especially if you have trouble doing things like getting out of bed. I've used this a lot. Is just to count down from 10, and then when you hit 1, just do it. That makes it a little easier to do because you can think about counting down from 10 instead of, getting out of bed when it's really warm or something. You can also count very slowly if you just want to sit there for a while. Another one, create trivial inconveniences. That is, make it not impossible, but slightly more difficult to do things that would distract you or that would get in the way of what you're doing. So, if you have an issue with using your phone when you want to write or, read or do something else, don't get rid of it. Don't put it in a block of ice in your freezer. But do something like turn it off and then put it in the next room. Then if you want to use it, you have to walk over there and then pick it up and then turn it on and then use it and then turn it back off and then put it back down and go back to what you were doing. And this is something you could obviously do whenever you wanted, but it creates a barrier that certain levels of distraction will simply not be able to overcome. One of the biggest memes in productivity is to just set a timer for 20 to 25 minutes and then work for that and then take a break for 5 minutes. And then once you've done this about 4 times, take a longer break of like 15 to 20 minutes. It's helpful for some people. There's a whole bunch of fucking tomato-themed timing apps and shit like that. It doesn't work too well for me. What I would advise you to do, though, especially if you have a lot of stuff on your plate, is to set a timer to check that you're actually doing something. Like a timer that goes off every half an hour, or in shorter intervals if you get distracted more easily. Just to make sure that you haven't wandered off from whatever you were doing and started reading a new fan fiction or talking to someone or just gone off to do one of 100 other things that weren't on your list. Also, understand that your list and your goals are negotiable. Often people will create a set of rules for themselves, and then they'll just think of ways to outsmart themselves, so they become like their own parents, and they're the kids who are outsmarting themselves, which is just silly. You should think of productivity as a cooperation across time. You want to make things better and easier for your future self. And in exchange, you want your future self to do the things that you want them to. Now, this is an important bargain, because if you just say fuck it and you leave your future self to hang, they'll leave whatever you wanted to do to hang too, probably. Other techniques, you should maybe, depending on how much stuff you have to get done and how urgent it is, consider taking every other day off. This can make it feel more important on the days that you actually are working. Maybe try to measure how well you're doing if you try taking a day off every other day. This one's very generic, also a big meme, but I have to include it for completeness. Try to find the small things that make big impacts. This has been stated in like 15 different ways in the maths and sciences. The Pareto principle, Price's law, Sturgeon's Revelation, my favorite, by Theodore Sturgeon, when someone asked him why anyone should care about science fiction if 90% of it is garbage. He then shouted, 90% of everything is garbage. Essentially, very small amounts of what you're doing are actually going to make a difference to your life or to anything in general. I mean, you can think about this in terms of, say, YouTube videos that you watch. Hopefully, a certain amount of this video is useful for you. Maybe a fifth. And of that, maybe this video represents a 10th to a 5th of the YouTube videos that you watch that are actually enjoyable or useful, I hope. So, of all the tasks on your to-do list, even of things that you want to do, there are probably things that have a much greater impact on whatever areas you're trying to affect. You should at least think about prioritizing those over other things. Also, you can become accountable. I already mentioned accountability up front. You can do things like post on social media. Like, if I really wanted to stop clopping to ponies right now, this minute, I would make a tweet saying that I had come to Jesus and I was going to stop clopping right now. And then if I did it ever again, I would make a tweet about it. And I would let everybody who I'd said that to know that I had actually clopped. And it would be really embarrassing, and it would feel dumb, and it would just be unpleasant. So that's one way to become accountable. Accountability means, in essence, that you have a really unpleasant feeling associated with whatever it is that you were trying to stop doing. Another way you can get that is to focus on whatever part, however tiny, of the thing that you want to do, that you want to stop wanting to do, that just doesn't mesh, that doesn't gel. Like I don't know, if you want to stop drinking cheap bourbon, you might make a case to yourself about how absolutely annoying that sipping sound is. Or how nasty it is that your eyes are leaking phlegm and pus and shit when they water when you drink it because you're a lightweight. And if you just play that up enough, you can create an impression of your mind that maybe it's not that great after all. You can also do this in reverse, especially with things like people you don't like, by finding something about them that you do like, however tiny, and then inflating it as much as you need to. But another way to become accountable, and probably the most effective, is to do it with money. The classic way of doing this is to find someone who you trust to do what you tell them, and give them a big fat envelope with a good chunk of your net worth in it. Like, if you have life savings, a good chunk of your life savings. If not, just a lot of fucking money. Like, enough to hurt. And then give them the parameters. If you don't get this done in this way, in this period of time, then they should take that money and mail it to the Illuminati, or Autism Speaks, or the KKK, or whatever you don't like. Nowadays, probably the best way to do this is using a service like StickK, because that will automate most of it, and you can also donate the money to charity. Another one that I would genuinely recommend, I haven't used StickK. I've used a few different productivity apps. I've used Wunderlist and Habit RPG and a whole bunch of different ones. For me, a lot of them suck because I'm not motivated the same way other people are. A lot of people seem to be motivated based on rewards, where I just don't see a lot of good to come of them. Like, I can't think of anything in the moment that I would want so badly that I'd be willing to do something that I wouldn't otherwise be willing to do to get it. And that's probably because I just have a very limited framework right now. I'm always on the lookout for things that I really, really want, on the off chance that I can use them when I need to for this kind of intrinsic motivation. But in general, I have to get some kind of pleasure out of the system itself. Or I have to find some way for the system to punish me if I don't get it done, especially for things that have to be done. Beeminder is really fucking useful for that. You just Well, you set up a PayPal account for it. That's what I do. And then if you don't meet a goal, you can define a goal in about any way you want. Then you lose that amount of money. And it starts out very small and then increases over time. And you set out a goal, which is then turned into a daily increment. If I want to write 1 million words in the next 10 years, then that becomes a certain amount of words per day. And if I don't meet that certain amount of words per day, then I'm fucked. But if I do, and then I exceed it, then that counts against the total for the next day. However, all of this is just techniques. Principles precede techniques. And there's something that you have to develop in order to be effective at productivity. There's something inside of you that you have to cultivate. And it can be different depending on the person, but it has to be something that you want to protect. Something that's so important to you that you're actually willing to get a fucking tomato timer and start talking about the 20-80 rule and taking every other day off and, you know, using Beeminder and sending your money to the KKK and shit like that. There has to be something that's important to you. And like I said before, it doesn't really matter if it's noble or heinous or whatever. It has to be a part of you. When I wanted to make Patient Zero, when I want to make almost anything, there's a visceral feeling that I want to prove somebody wrong, even if there's no one to prove something wrong to. I just want to show that something's possible. When I wrote a 200,000 word green text, I just wanted to show, I wanted to stick it in a real way to my English teacher who said that there was no such thing as a book written in the second person. I love proving people wrong, and I love having bragging rights, almost more than anything. I love being able to tell people about all the crazy shit I've done, especially when it just seems really mundane to me. But even deeper than that, I would say honestly that the biggest factor in my productivity, in my desire to manage my time and get as much done as possible, is a giant fear of death. I am terrified of dying. Maybe not of being dead. I don't know. There's a horrible line of poetry that I've slipped out of the world and forgotten that I was even born. That disturbs me. A lot. A lot. I don't want to not exist. I don't want to think about not existing. Although it probably will happen to me someday. I'm taking steps against it, even now, but the fact is that I want to put as much living in between myself and that as possible. Now, naturally, I'd like to live forever. Or I'd like to live for an arbitrarily long time until I decide that there is no more point living and die voluntarily. I do not want to die in, 60 years. So my first goal would naturally be to live forever. And I believe that there may in fact be ways to do this. Whether or not they become achievable in my lifetime, I somewhat doubt. So my next problem, because I can't much affect that, I don't have really the STEM skill set in order to make some kind of impact on things like cryobiology or the lengthening of telomeres or any of another dozen fields that might wind up helping in this. The next task left to me is to live the kind of life I would live if I lived forever. Or arbitrarily long until blah, 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 blah. And that is the kind of life that I try to live. There's a lot less of the fun stuff that I would probably put in if I had just an infinitely long or arbitrarily long period of time to work with. But in general, I try to do the things that I enjoy and to do things that I feel create a kind of meaning, especially a kind of meaning that I feel I can uniquely bring, like making JoJo's Bizarre Adventure pony fanfiction. It is this desire not only to live, but to avoid death, to be apotropaic, as I've forgotten his name. As that asshole who was always going on about Shakespeare said. It's that which drives me. A lot more than just having a technique or a to-do list or something like that. And I believe that you have something, or you can have something that is similar to that. You can find something in your life that is important to you. In my case, it's mostly self-interest, albeit maybe enlightened self-interest. But for you, it might be a family member, or a lover, a child that you want to have, a family that you'd like to have, some future goal, or your own future self. Your inner child, maybe. But whatever it is, whatever your wish or hope or dream or nindo is, you have to have it. You have to build a desire within you to find the right answer, to treat your problems in life as problems that can be solved, and then to try and solve them. Now that is something that I'm not sure I'm quite equipped to help you with. That said, I can tell you that if you move in this direction, if you try your best, or at least if you improve over time, you will come closer and closer to finding this thing deep inside of you, which will be able to drive you. And over time, this may well change. In my case, I'm not so sure. But there's a quote from the Zen of archery that a person at the beginning, when they learn, is careless. Or carefree, if you like, if you want to be a little nicer to them. They move without really understanding why. They pick things haphazardly. There's a fluidity to their movement that belies having any kind of practice or rigid control. And yet, although they discard that in order to achieve a greater and greater kind of mastery, by the time they reach true mastery, they gain back that carefreeness, that ability to act fluidly, as an indestructible characteristic. Don't bet on sinking ships. Become better. Find a change that you can make, even if it's bad, and try to make it. If it works, then good, and if it doesn't, then change and adjust in the opposite direction. That's 2 steps for progress, where otherwise you would be sitting around doing nothing. And don't forget to have fun. I think that's all I have to say. Fuck. Christ, it's fucking hot in here.